A lot of people think emotion regulation is getting rid of a feeling. It's not what it is. It's just having another relationship to it. I've had anxiety or live with it for a lot of my life, but sometimes I just say hello to it. It's like, hey, how you doing today? And it goes away pretty quickly. Or it just sits there. I think that's the other thing about emotion regulation that people kind of misunderstand. They think it's like, I got to check in with how I'm feeling all day long and then regulate, check in, regulate. Like you'd become psychotic if you did that all day long. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, our emotions are in the background. Like if you thought about your feelings all day long, you wouldn't be able to do this podcast. Like that's unproductive. Emotions matter when there's a shift in our environment or the relationships. If you said something that offended me, boom, I'm activated. I'm feeling angry or kind of shocked. Then I have to make a choice in that moment. Like, how do I manage it? That's where the magic happens.
Welcome to the Huberman Lab podcast, where we discuss science and science-based tools for everyday life. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. My guest today is Dr. Mark Brackett. Dr. Mark Brackett is a professor of psychology at Yale University, where he is also the director of Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. He is an expert in the science of emotions and how to apply that to improve communication and relationships and performance in school and work. One common problem around discussions of emotions and emotional intelligence is that they are often vague and, frankly, somewhat soft and cliche. But not when Mark Brackett explains emotional intelligence, as he does today, because he talks about the practical tools that emerge from the science of emotional intelligence that you can use to improve your emotional life, both with yourself and with others. And he's not just going to tell us to feel our emotions more deeply. While that could be important in certain settings, his research in and out of the laboratory is really focused on the small things that we can all do, both in moments of emotion, but also on our own, that can greatly increase our ability to understand what we're feeling, communicate it effectively, and to be better listeners, especially in moments that would otherwise create tension or confusion. In fact, what he shares today are life skills, the sort of life skills that make everything, school, friendships, romantic relationships, professional life, and family life far more effective and enriching. So I'm confident that you'll come away from today's episode with Mark Brackett, knowing what to do and when to use the tools that you'll learn, and they are indeed very powerful to improve your life. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at Stanford. It is, however, part of my desire and effort to bring zero cost to consumer information about science and science-related tools to the general public. In keeping with that theme, today's episode does include sponsors. And now for my discussion with Dr. Mark Brackett. Dr. Mark Brackett, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
So much to discuss today about emotion regulation, about the kids, the future. Are the kids all right?
They could be better.
Mm-hmm. And our obligation, our generation, other generations, in providing a world where kids can thrive and where everyone can thrive. It's a bit of a mess out there, but you're going to put some clarification on things for people. You're doing amazing work to give people tools for emotion regulation and more. So let's start off and define emotion regulation. What is that?
Yeah. Well, I think the simplest way to define it is using your emotions wisely to achieve your goals in life. It's a little too broad. And so it's funny, as I was writing my book, I decided I need a formula. And so my formula is ER, which is emotion regulation, is a set of goals and strategies. So it's ER parentheses G plus S. And that equals a function of E plus P plus C. It made me feel smart. Emotion, mm-hmm. person, context. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that specifically is that it's a goal-oriented process. You have to want to regulate. You can prevent unwanted emotions. I have an acronym for that too. It's PRIME. You can prevent unwanted emotions. You can reduce the difficult ones. I think people forget the I initiate emotions, like when you're teaching or leading or presenting, like you want to create an emotion in the room that's upregulating. You can maintain an emotion, like, I'm having a good day. I'm going to avoid these things and just keep it going, savor the moment. And then there's enhancing, which is kind of boosting an emotion. So that's PRIME, that's the goals. The strategies we can talk about for hours. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then I think what most people misunderstand is that like what we regulate are emotions. And like what I do, for example, to deal with my anxiety is really different than my anger, than my worry or other emotions. And that it's a function of the emotion you're feeling. It's a function of me as an individual. I am on the neurotic side. I'm on the introverted side. And so my strategy selection would be influenced by that. And then the context, like right here, right now, like I know you're into fitness and like running and, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, Andrew, I'm really nervous right now. Like, do you mind if we take a break and I go for a run? Like, it's a little weird, Mark. So context matters. You got to be like, right now, if I were anxious, it's like, Mark, you got to use some cognitive strategies or breathing work. I can't go anywhere, so I'm stuck. And I think people need to see that kind of full spectrum.
I feel like there's a close tie between emotion regulation and self-awareness.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a tension between self-awareness and being able to experience and enjoy life. For instance, if I'm feeling anxious, I'm thinking about how I'm appearing, how I'm sounding, that it's uncomfortable. But if I get totally outside of that and just be in the experience that I'm in, then there's the potential to say the wrong thing or, offend somebody or who knows. So when we talk about emotion regulation, what's the best approach to that doesn't keep us in a subtext in our mind and sort of out of the room?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're alone, it's quite a bit different. We can breathe, we can use whatever self-regulation tools we want.
Or ruminate.
Or ruminate, or write, or text or call a friend, whatever it is. But when we're at work, at school, on a podcast, if there's that subtext, like I'm not locked in here, I'm not in the experience completely, I'm self-regulating or paying attention to myself, that can be very uncomfortable in its own right. It's work.
Yeah, it's effortful. And not always the best effort if it's going down the rabbit hole. I think that you're getting at, which is this mindset piece, that the first step is our mindset about our feelings. So let me ask you, what's your mindset around anxiety?
I have assumptions around it. I was telling someone the other day, because I spend a lot of time alone and I'm fairly introverted, but if I go into a crowded environment, for the first 5-6 minutes, I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed. Like, whoa, it is really crowded in here. There are a lot of people. And I actually feel like I have a bit of a social interaction disorder for those first few minutes. But then after about 20, 30 minutes, I'm in that experience and I feel like I'm very comfortable. So I have this mindset that social anxiety is something that is like wading into water. It's always a little bit too cold at first, or usually it's a little too cold, but over time you acclimate.
All right, you didn't answer the question.
Okay.
So I'm going to frame it another way. What's your relationship to anxiety?
I hate it.
Okay, there you go. See how you automatically were like, I hate anxiety. I did too for most of my life. And then I was with a friend who's a neuroscientist about anxiety. And she said to me, Mark, tell me all the things that make you anxious. I said, well, I'm anxious about fundraising. And, I got to raise the money to keep the research going. I'm anxious to I want to make sure that like everything we do is high quality. And I went on. And then she asked me another question. She said, well, what do those have in common? I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I thought about it and I said, well, those are things that are important to me. And so she said, so why would anxiety be a bad thing? And I think that we have to learn how to adopt a mindset around emotions, that there are no bad emotions. It's what we do with our emotions that makes them harmful or difficult for us to live our lives. But anxiety is a good thing. It's saying there's perceived uncertainty around the future. Like, I'm anxious about how I'm going to act in this environment or how I'm going to be perceived in this environment. It's not a bad thing because you want to be perceived well. But if you automatically assume it's bad, then it's going to put you on the path to dysregulation.
So if we accept the idea that all emotions are okay,
yeah,
but that the expression of all emotions is in every context is not okay, that it should
Correct.
be context specific.
Yes.
I actually think that provides some freedom. I can feel that freedom. Like, it's okay to be super angry. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be anxious. But how that's expressed is what's critical. It makes good intuitive sense. I think that what's hard to know is what to do with the emotion if there is no outward expression of it. Like where should it go?
Well, it doesn't have to go anywhere sometimes. Sometimes it can just be. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of regulation, which is that a lot of people think emotion regulation is getting rid of a feeling. It's not what it is. It's just having another relationship to it. Like, I'm 56. I've had anxiety or lived with it for a lot of my life, but sometimes I just say hello to it. It's like, hey, how you doing today? And it goes away pretty quickly, or it just sits there. I think that's the other thing about emotion regulation that people kind of misunderstand. They think it's like, I got to check in with how I'm feeling all day long and then regulate, check and regulate. Like, you become psychotic if you did that all day long. Most of the time, our emotions are in the background. Like if you thought about your feelings all day long, you wouldn't be able to do this podcast. Like that's unproductive. Emotions matter when there's a shift in our environment or the relationships. If you said something that offended me, boom, I'm activated. I'm feeling angry or kind of shocked. Then I have to make a choice in that moment. Like, how do I manage it? That's where the magic happens. But on a day-to-day basis, thank God we're not, we wouldn't want to do that.
I would like to take a quick break and acknowledge one of our sponsors, Joovv. Joovv makes medical-grade red light therapy devices. Now, if there's one thing that I have consistently emphasized on this podcast, is the incredible impact that light can have on our biology and our health. Now, in addition to sunlight, which I've talked about a lot on this podcast, red light, near-infrared, and infrared light have been specifically shown to have positive effects on improving numerous aspects of cellular and organ health. These include faster muscle recovery, improved skin health, wound healing, improvements in acne, reduced pain and inflammation, improved mitochondrial function, and even improvements in vision. Nowadays, there are a lot of red light devices out there, but what sets Joovv lights apart and why they're my preferred red light therapy device is that they use clinically proven wavelengths, meaning they use the specific wavelengths of red light, near-infrared, and infrared light in combination to trigger the optimal cellular adaptations. Personally, I use the Joovv whole body panel about 3 to 4 times a week, usually for about 10 to 20 minutes per session. And I use the Joovv handheld light both at home and when I travel. If you would like to try Joovv, they're offering up to $400 off select products for listeners of this podcast. To learn more, visit Joovv, spelled JOOVV.com/Huberman. Again, that's JOOVV.com/Huberman. Today's episode is also brought to us by Lingo. One of the most important factors in your short and long-term health is your body's ability to manage glucose over time. Glucose directly impacts our brain function, mood, and energy. You want your glucose relatively stable across the day without big peaks or valleys. This is why I use the continuous glucose monitoring app from Lingo by Abbott. Lingo provides minute-by-minute glucose data directly within the app, showing you how your glucose responds to food, exercise, and stress. This information can help you make smarter choices to support your health both now and in the long term. The CDC estimates that more than 1 in 3 American adults has prediabetes, and that many of these people don't know they are living with prediabetes. Visibility about how your diet and activity affect your glucose can be the first step toward informed conversations with your doctor and making smarter daily choices. If you'd like to try Lingo, Lingo is offering Huberman Lab listeners in the US and UK 10% off a 4-week plan. Just visit hellolingo.com/Huberman for more information. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's hellolingo.com/Huberman. I'd love to poke at some of the assumptions that I know I have, but I wonder if other people have as well. My dad's from South America, and I remember long ago, he said because he went to formal schools, he said that he was raised with this terrible idea, he called it terrible, that if somebody was happy and they smiled a lot, that they were stupid. And I said, what is that about? And he said, well, that came, in his words, from the British school system where the idea was that you were supposed to be skeptical of things. And that if you were happy or happy-go-lucky and you weren't drinking, that people would assume that you were an idiot because you weren't bothered by the problems in the world and you were accepting of the things that you heard and were told. In other words, you're an idiot. And my dad's a very happy person now.
Sure.
And he has talked about, having to break that mold, that like it's okay to wake up and take a walk and be happy, that it's okay to be happy. And so that's just one thing that I think I grew up thinking too, and maybe not to that extreme, that if, especially in academia, like if you're not just like to be happy is to not be discerning. It's totally false, right?
Of course.
Now we're a long way from England right now. And that's probably something more of my dad's generation than mine. But I think the idea nowadays does seem to be that if you're happy-go-lucky and you're feeling good, that you must not be thinking about all the terrible things going on in the world, or that it's insensitive to those that are suffering, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I'd love your thoughts on this idea that we don't give ourselves permission to feel as good as we might feel because of some social pressure or assumptions that we've internalized.
Which is all learned. Mm-hmm. And so these are learned phenomenon. And it's sometimes outside influence. So talk about happiness. As I was writing and I was doing the chapter on mindsets around emotion and talking about this relationship with different emotions. And, we could play around with this all day long. I could say, what's your relationship to anger? What's your relationship to happiness and contentment? And all of a sudden you start realizing, wow, I have a complicated relationship with my emotions. And I was thinking about it with happiness too. And for me, what's interesting, which is different completely from your dad's, is because of my kind of tough childhood and a lot of bullying, is that I would go to school one day and I would be happy. And I'd see the bullies, and all of a sudden they say things like, what are you so happy about today, Brackett? And I didn't realize that until I was writing. And then I would get on stage and I do a lot of public speaking. And I'd be standing there like feeling really good with my speaking. And then I get the applause at the end, and I would start kind of looking down. And I started realizing I'm uncomfortable being happy. Like I'm waiting for something to go wrong because, in my childhood, like happy meant like, we're going to bring you down. We all have these kind of developmental connections, for lack of a better term, to our different emotions. And I think that it gets back to the phenomenon. There's no good or bad emotions. Life, firstly, some of it is genetic and biological, our proclivity to experience certain emotions. The regulation piece is all learned. Like you're not born with a pocket full of evidence-based strategies to regulate. It's just like, I don't know about you growing up. My father, it was very different. My father was the angry guy, and he'd say, "Son, you got to toughen up." I'm like, "Dad, look at me. Come on, let's move on. It's not happening." And that I have a 5th-degree black belt. I became the tough guy that my father wanted me to be. But nevertheless, what does that even mean? But, growing up, when I was struggling, my parents missed a lot of the cues. Come down the stairs. I didn't have my father say, "Son, I'm noticing a shift in your emotions today. Your posture is different. Your facial expression is different. Let me give you a research-based strategy to help you regulate your anxiety, stress, pressure, fear." No, it wasn't even a construct. I mean, I don't know, but did you grow up with a concept of emotion regulation?
Definitely.
You did.
And there was a big gender split. In my home, I had the sort of belief based on the context that women could express their emotions big or small, and that men weren't supposed to lose their temper. Men weren't supposed to be angry.
That's interesting. It's kind of counter the way people think about it nowadays, right? Like, the men are like, the more power you have, the more anger you can express.
Oh, the complete opposite of that. In fact, and I don't think he'll mind. My dad's been on this podcast, and we have a great relationship now, and and we've done work, and it's been awesome. I mean, it really has. I mean, and I remember when I was a kid, if he got angry, he would blink. And now I know that as like behavioral suppression. He was like blinking, but I can't ever remember my dad having an outburst ever. So I just internalized this idea, like, okay, you don't have outbursts. But I have a certain side of my family that, my extended family that's from New Jersey.
Oh, okay,
and where words are sometimes used as weapons.
Okay.
And anger is a bit more outward sometimes, at least in that side. And then I have a South American side where things are more, formal and boxed away. And I think I internalized a bit of both. And so I have all sorts of constructs around who's allowed to express emotions and what extremes. But I didn't observe a lot of anger.
Or maybe a little suppression.
Lots of suppression.
Which is regulation. It's just not the adaptive kind usually.
Right. And, I probably averaged the two, in my own life. But in terms of happiness, I think the same thing now that I think about it, that it's okay for women to be fully expressive and for men to be, it's a bit more of the, it's kind of the 1950s model that was very present in my home and in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I can think with happiness, as with any emotion, it's about the time and the place for happiness. Like we have research that shows that people who strive to be happy all the time actually are more miserable because it's hard to live up to that all the time. People who strive for more contentment in their life actually seem to have greater well-being. And so I just think, again, it goes back to these mindsets around emotions, that there's no good or bad emotion. Anger is fine. Obviously, if it's too intense and it's lasting too long, it's probably not going to be good. Happiness is something that we should, experience, but, if we're attached to it, it's going to be problematic because every day is not a sunny day. There are rainy days too, and you got to be comfortable with the rainy days. And the important thing also is not just our feelings about our feelings. It's also about our mindsets around our capacity to deal with those feelings. Like, do I believe I am capable of managing my anger? Do I believe I'm capable of dealing with the disappointment? And we find a distribution of scores for that too. Like, going back to my dad, we have very different fathers. My father would say things like, "Son, this is the way I deal with my anger. You're going to have to get used to it." I would say now, like, sounds like you got a fixed mindset, Dad. Like there are other options, to deal with your anger. But he was sort of like, this is the way I am. You're going to have to deal with it. No learning interests. Whereas nowadays, I hope to help people see, wait a minute, is that emotion working for you in your relationships or not? If it's not, there are alternatives.
We were talking about boys and men quite a bit already here. So maybe we just continue in that direction, even though we will touch on girls and women and emotions as it relates to them too. I hear a lot nowadays about problems for boys and young men in emotion regulation, in defining masculinity. I'm obviously interested in this, but I also acknowledge that I'm Gen X. I was born in 1975. Things were very different.
Yeah.
And I know I have a giant blind spot to their experience. Right? I just do. I acknowledge that because I don't really have a finger on the pulse of what life is like for a 15-year-old or 12-year-old or 20-year-old guy out there. What are the pain points and what's going right?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And I think probably the big issue here with gender is vulnerability. That historically, this is not just now, this is going back to when we were kids, when our parents were kids, go back to other periods in time, is that vulnerability, especially for men, is weak. You got to be tough. You're the person who has to, make the ends meet. You're the hunter-gatherer. And obviously times have changed. And what we find is that the thought today for many boys and men to be emotional. Firstly, emotional alone has a connotation of feminine and out of control. That's just the way people think about it.
Still?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
When you say, don't be so emotional, it's considered to be a negative thing. It's considered to be feminine, and it's considered to be like a hysterical. That's why I call it emotion skills, not emotional skills. Anyway. So vulnerability is a big piece of it. This is going to be a great conversation between two guys. So what's your relationship to vulnerability?
Totally context dependent.
Okay.
I mean, there are people I'm not afraid at all to cry in front of. There are contexts and people that I would never cry. I mean, I've cried on very public podcasts, 2, maybe 3. One here, when Martha Beck came on, she wasn't trying, but it was happening. Yep. And then on Stephen Bartlett's podcast, I think perhaps on another, and it was tough. I mean, I didn't want to watch those clips, but I'm glad I did it. So it was totally context dependent.
Yeah, and that makes sense. What I'm really pushing for is like around emotion and about talking about feelings. And so what we find is that boys generally feel more inhibited just saying how they feel, especially when it comes to kind of the sad, disappointment, ashamed emotions. It's much easier to express the anger, and the outwardly expressive emotions, but the deep ones that are self-conscious, that make you vulnerable, tends to be tough. And the question is, why is that the case? What are your hypotheses? Why would it be that so many boys feel like they're going to be perceived as feminine if they say they're disappointed or sad or ashamed?
What immediately comes to mind is that somehow it is linked with the word incapable or incapability.
Exactly.
There's an incredible video of David Goggins breaking down crying on stage. And he was celebrated for that. But David Goggins did a lot of things beforehand. And no one denies his capability, his ability. So when he cried, it was like, awesome. He's willing to go to this really hard place. Yet another difficult thing that David can do that most people can't do. And you just go like, awesome. And he's owning it. And I stepped back from that and realized, but we already knew former Navy SEAL, went from 300 plus pounds to this fit individual, Goggins. Yeah. He's a verb, an adjective, and a pronoun, right? So it's like, shit, if someone else just breaks down on stage, okay, like, I hope this guy can make it in life. That's the narrative.
It's like weak.
You worry sometimes for people like that. I don't worry about David Goggins.
Because he's a superstar and we have a different mindset around him again. And so he has the permission to do whatever the hell he wants. And
that permission thing, forgive me, but this notion of earned the right. I mean, there are people like James Cameron, who wrote all these movies and was famous for like doing all these super difficult things. And then a few years back was like claiming that testosterone poisoned men and that his testosterone was the worst thing. And everyone that liked his movies said, hey, listen, easy for you to say now. You built that career on some of that. So it wasn't, in my opinion, taken that seriously. He may not like it if he hears this, but like, I'm like, that's like when our colleagues are like, oh, I'm no longer going to publish in Nature and Science. I'm going to go to these like, these open source journals. It's like, you got in the National Academy on Nature and Science papers. So like, you're not kidding anybody.
Well, you're making an important point, which is that once I always find it interesting with celebrities, once they become super famous, I can now disclose, I've been depressed or I've been anxious or I've been overwhelmed. But for some reason, they didn't want to take that risk when they were younger in their careers because, again, the perception is like, oh, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, that's weak. And so that's the point. The point is that we raise kids, boys in particular, to believe that these feminine type emotions, which are not feminine by nature, they're just human emotions, are weak. And therefore, that means I'm going to be perceived as not only weak, but potentially homosexual. And that's also a stigma. And so what do? I suppress, I deny, I ignore. Interestingly enough, for women, what the research shows is that much less likely to suppress or deny, much more likely to ruminate.
A couple of things. First of all, I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like the stereotype of gay men being feminine has fallen away somewhat. I grew up in the skateboarding community. There's Brian Anderson. He was a big expose in not expose where they exposed him, where he voluntarily, came out in the New York Times. And he's one of the most aggressive, skateboarders out there, aggressive in the skateboarding, right? So he's big dude, So I feel like that stereotype has kind of shifted a bit, where people assume that there's a range.
I think that you're ambitious there. I think you're right. I mean, we know.
So being gay is still sissy.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, if you ask 100 people to run like a gay man,
they're still caught in the Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah, they're gonna show you someone who's more feminine or kind of stereotypically feminine, to be honest with you. So while we know, I mean, certainly, I remember when I was 18, I went to a gay bar, and I grew up in New Jersey. It was very homophobic. The only gay person I really knew was my mother's hairdresser, who was very flamboyant. And then I went to this gay bar, and I was like, oh my God, it's like Wall Street executives here. It was football players. It was a total, shift in my perception. Nevertheless, if you ask the majority of people, it's still considered to be, the mindset is feminine.
Got it. Yeah, I guess if you grew up training in gyms, which I did, you're around a lot of like very strong, physically strong, gay men.
Yeah.
So they were kind of early to the gym culture, so maybe my lens on that is a little distorted. There's something interesting around this notion of sissy showing emotion and boys. And earlier we were talking about the movie Stand By Me, a movie I absolutely love. I think it's just like a perfect story. It's a Stephen King story, right? Turned into a movie. I think Rob Reiner wrote that movie.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that movie is the transition because that happens right around puberty and it's right before junior high school, it's between junior high and high school. I can't remember. Some transition, and the kids are at different developmental stages. I feel like this is a big part of it, where like, let's say a kid is a little bit more emotional, a little more coddled at home, perhaps. I'm making a lot of assumptions here, and cries in front of a group of boys when you're in the 7th or 8th grade. Some of those boys are because of their stage of maturation, they're not really little kids anymore. They're like, dude, what are you doing? And then you've mixed all those kids together, and because of the way that schools and social dynamics are, that can stay with a kid for a long time. Like being sort of having an emotional expression, that can stick with you for like 2-3 years of school, right? So I feel like some of this stuff comes about that way, which is very different than like just taking us like a hypothetical scenario, an adult male in the business place. Maybe he's new, where things tend to equalize a bit in terms of maturational stage. And so these are two different things: boys crying versus young men crying versus quote unquote grown men cry.
Again, this is all nurture. So if you go to schools that do our work, I just interviewed a bunch of teenage boys actually. It blow your mind. They have a whole different perception of emotion. I ask them these questions about men and boys and, and their responses are like, huh? Like, what's wrong with crying? Like, if you feel like crying, you cry. Like, are you sure? Even
no ridicule.
No ridicule. I said, well, what if you get into a fight? Can you talk to the kid about what happened and tell them how you felt when they left you out? And they're like, of course, that's how we grew up. But they grew up in a school that took emotion seriously. They gave them the skills and the resources to do it. It reminds me, actually, I'll never forget this, since we're on this topic of boys and men, I was in the beginning of my career doing training in emotional regulation in London, outside of London, a very kind of rough and tough neighborhood. And the head mistress, as they call it back then, of the school, she looked at me and she's like, you know something, Mark? This program's going to turn the boys into homosexuals. I'm like, okay, where'd that come from? I'm thinking to myself, you need a lot more training than just emotional intelligence, but I'll put that aside for a minute. Anyhow, I said, I'm here. So can we just go and do it? Let me demonstrate it. Not a problem. We go like a fishbowl. Here I am, the teacher in the middle of the room. I have 25 teachers around me and 20 kids in the middle. And I start sharing a story about my life, whatever it was. I was about probably feeling discouraged. I think it was when I first got into the martial arts, it was tough. I was not a tough boy and I was afraid of my shadow. And I had all this bullying and abuse and going to a karate studio. It was a big shock for me. I happened to have an amazing teacher who transformed my life and became a career of mine, martial arts. Anyhow, I told a story about that, about how I failed my yellow belt. And I just hated myself. And not only was I bullied, but I couldn't even get a freaking yellow belt, discouraged, hopeless. And everybody's looking at me where's this going? The teachers, the kids were glued. They loved hearing the story. And then I said, I'm just curious. Has anyone else ever felt the way I felt? And I said, just raise your hand if you've had that kind of feeling. Every freaking kid in the classroom raised their hand. And of course, I look over at that headmistress and I'm like, let's talk later. Kids are dying to express their emotions, boys and girls. We've just socialized it. And the socialization piece is really important because even the way fathers talk to their boy children, is different. It's the toughen up, it's da-da-da. They use more feeling words with girls than with boys. We're not born that way. We are socialized into, having these complicated relationships with certain emotions. But it's not something that can't be modified with good instruction.
You're saying this, I'm realizing I internalized so many things that skew my perspective on this. I guess I should say I'm relieved to hear that expression of emotions among boys is more accepted now. I think that's
the generation that's going through this work. The kids who are growing up in places that are not taking emotion seriously are growing up with a more stereotypical way of viewing it. It's got to be infused into your life. You got to have these conversations. You got to be in situations where, in our work, just to give you an example, we're really rigorous about teaching this stuff. This isn't just sort of kumbaya sitting in a circle. Right. This is all right, everyone, we've got a problem here. There's, the Gaga pit, which is in these, this thing in schools. There's a kid who nobody is, allowing to participate. That kid feels awful. What's our obligation? What are we supposed to do to handle that? Imagine you're that kid. Imagine you're the one that nobody wants to be, part of the game. Now we're going to get into groups and we're going to think about A, what are the feelings? B, what are the solutions? What do you do for yourself? What do you do for the other person? And it's rigorous conversations around the techniques and they got to role play it. And then we ask questions about the role plays. Well, what if it goes wrong? What happens if you say this? And they say, go blank yourself. What do you do then? And that's the kind of complex, muscle building we're giving kids in terms of dealing with emotions.
As many of you know, I've been taking AG1 for nearly 15 years now. I discovered it way back in 2012, long before I ever had a podcast, and I've been taking it every day since. The reason I started taking it, and the reason I still take it, is because AG1 is, to my knowledge, the highest quality and most comprehensive of the foundational nutritional supplements on the market. It combines vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, probiotics, and adaptogens into a single scoop that's easy to drink and it tastes great. It's designed to support things like gut health, immune health, and overall energy. And it does so by helping to fill any gaps you might have in your daily nutrition. Now, of course, everyone should strive to eat nutritious whole foods. I certainly do that every day. But I'm often asked if you could take just one supplement, what would that supplement be? And my answer is always AG1, because it has just been oh so critical to supporting all aspects of my physical health, mental health, and performance. I know this from my own experience with AG1, and I continually hear this from other people who use AG1 daily. If you would like to try AG1, you can go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to get a special offer. For a limited time, AG1 is giving away 6 free travel packs of AG1 and a bottle of vitamin D3 K2 with your subscription. Again, that's drinkag1 with the numeral 1.com/Huberman to get 6 free travel packs and a bottle of vitamin D3 K2 with your subscription. There is a hardwired bias towards rough and tumble play in males of all species, including ours. I think what you're talking about a little bit is a capacity also for kind of rough and tumble verbal and emotional exchange, which is not necessarily like F you and this and that, but some of that can be in jest. Some of it can be really damaging. There's something interesting that I learned a long time ago. Even in academia, he's now dead, but there was a very famous neuroscientist. I'll never forget. Went to my first McKnight meeting. I was so excited to be there, and he came over. He was, he's a pretty large guy, and he grabbed me, and he goes, "So, where are you?" I was picking between laboratories, between this place and that place. He goes, "Where is it gonna be?" And then he kind of gave me his advice, and that was a very comfortable exchange for me because I grew up with a lot of physical interaction. Usually guys not putting their arm around me and telling me "So what's it going to be?" kind of thing. But oftentimes, if I interact with somebody that's kind of like an old friend or something, they'll grab my shoulder, just walking by. There's a lot of just kind of physical interaction that just happens. It certainly doesn't feel weird or aversive.
Sure.
And I could see if somebody, for instance, was not used to just a lot of physical interaction with other people, that could feel like a lot. And so I'm wondering nowadays, where are things with respect to sort of just the amount of physical interaction between kids? Are they just feeling and voicing their emotions, but they're at a physical distance? Or are they, seeing one another and handshakes and hugs, what's up? And, or just friendly, the kind of physical banter?
I think it's cultural. There's a lot going on there in terms of, the type of school and, where it is in the United States or in the world. Touch is a cultural thing. But I think, what I want to say about what you said is that rough and tumble is fine. Of course, rough and tumble. But when it becomes a power over, that's when it becomes a problem. When you have no concern for the emotional life of the other. That's where
bullying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The dialogue that sort of establishes hierarchy, I guess, is what, if I'm really blunt about it, I just feel like that just happened naturally in my friend group when I was a kid. There were some kids who were more developed and more athletic or better at this or better at that. And we just kind of all fell into place. It wasn't necessarily about being at the apex or being at the bottom.
Or the intention to harm.
Yeah, we sort of formed a team where you understood that, this kid was fast and this one was strong and this one was clever and this one was creative. And actually there was a goofy kid on our street who was always the comedian. I think later he actually tried to become a comedian or became a comedian. And everyone just kind of was all right, you didn't expect him to be like the other kid and you didn't expect yourself to kind of check off all boxes. I wonder the extent to which young males in particular nowadays feel the need to check off all the boxes of what it is to be a guy. Play a sport, be good in school, whatever.
Well, that's again the developmental thing. And I think what happens is that you watch kids play in kindergarten, they're not thinking about this kind of stuff. Although it's sinking in or it's seeping in. What's the word? I was in a school recently, and a boy raised his hand that he was in a blue quadrant of our mood meter, and he was feeling down or sad. And I said, "Do you need anything right now?" And he said, "No." And I got kind of taken by surprise. And I said, "You sure? We can talk about it." He's like, "I don't want to bother you, sir." And that was an eye opener for me. That already, his emotions were a nuisance, and that's what I want to make sure that we address. No one's emotion should be a burden. A kid should be able to talk about it and deal with it. We want that kid to be a good learner. We want that kid to be a good friend. And if he's already suppressing, denying, ignoring, in kindergarten, it's not going to be a pretty ride. And those things change developmentally. Kids are much more comfortable talking to each other about their feelings in elementary school and middle school. It starts getting, I got to look around and again, with the homophobia piece. And in high school, you see less and less touching, or, kind of the kind of friendship kind of stuff that you might have seen early on. And that goes back to the things that we were kind of chatting about, toxic masculinity, kind of this manosphere. And again, my hope is that we rethink child development. We've spent so much time thinking about some of the unnecessary things. Reading and writing and arithmetic obviously are important. But if you don't recognize that how we feel and how we deal with our feelings is going to drive the quality of your relationships, your well-being, your ability to deal with life's ups and downs and the harsh feedback you're going to get in life, and ultimately, having your dreams come true. It's interesting, as someone who works at a university where everyone has perfect SAT scores, everyone has grade point averages that are better than mine were, everyone plays an instrument I never heard of before, everyone has done everything to get into this place. And so I have like 700